The most feared pen in modern rap just got snapped in half on a live broadcast, and the hand that broke it belongs to the exact same voice that spent half a decade defending its owner like blood on the pavement. When the smoke from that stream finally cleared, the only things Drake left standing behind him were a diamond-crusted wrist, a hollow warning with nobody's name on it, and a legal filing this culture has already decided it will never let him bury under new music, new bracelets, or new streams. What is up, family? Welcome back to the channel, and welcome to the exact moment this myth stopped defending itself. Now listen, before we crack a single frame of this open, I need you to feel the full gravity of what just unfolded. Because this is not another disposable clip bouncing around your timeline for 48 hours before the algorithm forgets it ever existed. This is the final coat of paint peeled off the Drake myth, and it happened on the precise circuit Drake himself helped build with every podcast cosign, every friendly guest spot, every generous nod he ever handed to the ecosystem that just turned around and shivved him with his own pen. I'm about to walk you through the exact words Drake spoke on that stream, decode the actual name that warning was pointed at, break down why the toughest room in podcasting decided to pull the emergency cord on live air the second the clip landed, and lay out precisely what this whole sequence means for every rapper watching from the safety of a folded chair on the sidelines right now. And let's cut the fat off this. Even a leftover crumb of Drake discourse still moves more numbers than most rappers' full album cycles. But attention and fear are two completely separate currencies, and one of those bank accounts just froze in front of the entire planet. So if you are locked in for this breakdown, you know what time it is. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, share this with anybody who still swears the Drake pen swings the same way it did in 2018, because from the stream footage to the courtroom paperwork to the podcast panel calling him corny to his face, this myth is coming apart at every single seam, and we are going to need every second on the clock to unpack it properly. So without any more preamble, let us dig in, because the receipts stack higher every hour that passes, and the culture is not slowing down for anybody's feelings tonight. For anybody who somehow slept through the past 72 hours of internet chaos, Drake stepped into that kick stream with the state crew the other night, and somewhere between the poker hands, the jewelry parade, and the general victory lap performance he was putting on for the crowd, he looked straight into the camera and issued a message directly to the rap game. The gist of it, cleaned up for polite company, went something like this. Appreciate all the affection. The last stretch has been legendary for me personally. I dropped 3 of these projects on their heads. Everybody else is putting out albums that come and go like weekend weather. One day it is hello, and the next day it is goodbye. And then came the sentence that lit the whole timeline on fire. Watch how you respond, because the ink still moves. That was the declaration. That was the whole shot fired across the water. And look, on paper, that is textbook Drake energy. Confident, dismissive, dripping with the untouchable posture that turned him into the most feared hitmaker of his entire era, the one who could turn a subliminal into a career-ending event with one line and one raised eyebrow. The internet did exactly what the internet does with a moment like that. It fractured into camps within the first hour, chopped the clip into 1,000 tiny pieces, and kicked off the great decoding session in real time. Who was he actually addressing? Whose forehead was that warning quietly taped to? Was it a scattershot at the whole field, or was there a specific bullseye burned into somebody's back? Because here is the thing about warnings in this genre. A warning with no name attached to it is either a signal flare for the whole neighborhood or a paper shield covering absolutely nobody at all. And figuring out which category this one falls into matters more than the actual line itself. Now, I have marinated on this for days. I have read every hot take on every corner of the internet. I have watched every reaction video that popped up in my feed. I have gone frame by frame through the stream itself. And after all of that, only one name adds up when you actually run the math down to the last decimal. A$AP Rocky. And I am not throwing darts at a wall blindfolded here. The trail of proof is basically glowing in the dark like a neon sign. Think about who is genuinely trading blows with Drake right this very second. Not retired from the ring like Cole, not sitting above the fray like Jay, not too big to acknowledge the noise like Kendrick, but actively swinging, actively landing, actively drawing blood. You had bars from Drake aimed straight at Rocky on Iceman. You had bars flying right back on Rocky's own project, including that already legendary back and forth about lifted flows and lifted relationships. The whole, where's she at, your girl shouldn't be single, volley that had the whole culture howling for weeks. And the exchange never stayed inside the booth either. Rocky sat down with Jason Lee and spoke on Drake openly, chest all the way out, no hedging, no diplomatic sidesteps. Then you got Rihanna floating around Rocky at every event, dropping her own little pin grenades about the ex still lurking in the studio, watching from the corner, running to record about it the moment he sees her boyfriend enter a room. That is not a cold war between these two men. That is an active engagement with live rounds crossing the field in both directions, and neither camp showing any signs of standing down for a truce, a peace summit, or a diplomatic sit-down. Rocky is not walking anything back. Drake is not walking anything back. The wives, the girlfriends, the babies, the studio sessions, the Fashion Week appearances, every single one of those pressure points has already been weaponized on wax by one side or the other. And every one of them is still sitting there loaded on the table waiting for the next round to start. So when Drake walks onto a stream and warns anonymous MCs about being careless with their response, the only rapper on planet Earth currently standing across from him with his gloves up is A$AP Rocky. Period. And before anybody floods the comments with the Jay-Z theory, let me plant both feet on the ground and address it. Be so serious with yourselves right now. Nobody in this business is warning Jay-Z about a rap reply. Nobody is telling HOV to watch his mouth because the ink still moves. Retire that theory immediately and let us scan the rest of the chessboard while we are already here. Big Sean has not opened his mouth once about any of this, and honestly, Big Sean would probably have more legitimate historical reason than most to feel some type of way about Drake. Overlapping lanes, overlapping vocal pockets, two careers that started at the same intersection in the late 2000s and ended in completely different tax brackets by 2020, but Sean is mute. Tyler is not biting. Baby Keem is not biting. Whale is not biting. Cudi is not biting. Meek Mill has moved on with his life. Pusha T is content sitting in his Clips victory lap. Rick Ross said what he had to say and dipped. The list of MCs sitting in any kind of live tension with Drake right now begins and ends with a single name, and that name is A$AP Rocky. Full stop. No debate. No gymnastics required to arrive at the conclusion. And let me stack one more layer on this before we move to the next act, because the timing of Drake's warning is doing a mountain of silent work in the background that most people scrolled straight past. This did not drop into a vacuum. This dropped at the tail end of what has been, purely from a commercial numbers perspective, one of the strongest stretches Drake has had since the Kendrick war officially ended. 3 projects moved units, the charts bent under the weight, the narrative machine started humming again about a comeback tour, about a redemption arc, about the king climbing back onto his throne one day at a time. And that is exactly why the warning had to land right now, at this specific altitude, on this specific night. When you are down, you do not warn anybody. There is no leverage to spend and no audience willing to take it seriously. You warn people from an altitude. You warn people when the streams are climbing, when the fans are chanting, when it feels like the wind swung back into your sails. That is not strategy. That is just timing 101 in this genre, and every A&R with a functioning brain runs the same playbook when the numbers are hot and the enemies are quiet. But it also exposes the softness underneath it, because if the position were genuinely as solid as the sales numbers suggest on paper, the warning would not need to exist at all in the first place. Confident kings do not announce that the sword is still sharp. They just carry it and let the shine do the talking for them. The fact that Drake felt the pull to spell it out on a gambling stream, sandwiched between chain reveals and blackjack hands, tells you the silence from the actual MC community was starting to echo a little too loud around him. But here is where the floor drops out completely from under this entire situation, because while the timeline was still busy running its own decoder in every group chat and every quote tweet, a fresh episode of the Joe Budden podcast landed on the internet. And Budden himself, personally, on his own microphone, walked directly in front of that warning and said 2 syllables that hit harder than everything Drake had said on that entire stream combined. Cut it out. And I need you to let those 2 words breathe for a second, because if you rock with this channel, you already know I have gone bar for bar with that podcast up and down this feed for years. I have questioned the takes. I have questioned the consistency. I have questioned the whole operation from top to bottom, from the panel dynamics to the ad reads. So understand the actual weight when I tell you this may be the first time in a very long stretch where I fully, no asterisks, no qualifiers, no side clauses, cosign a Joe Budden take word for word. And the take itself is elementary but surgical. The rappers who can actually rap, the real MCs with functioning pens in this game right now, are simply not scared of Drake anymore. Not one of them. Nobody is up at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling wondering whether the ink is wet or dry or dipped in platinum or whatever jewelry-flavored metaphor we are dressing it up in this quarter. Nobody is losing sleep over that signature. Nobody is delaying an album drop out of fear that Drake might slide in and clip them on the way out. Nobody is scrubbing verses off unreleased tapes because a Drake stream mentioned a pen. That entire behavior pattern is extinct in the modern rap ecosystem, and pretending otherwise is doing damage to the analysis. And the reason that verdict lands with such gravity coming from Budden specifically is that this is not a hater's voice speaking. This is the guy who has hauled water for Drake through the darkest patches of the last 2 calendar years. When the man's own castle wall starts echoing, cut it out back at him, the bricks are not just cracked anymore, they are already falling from the top down. And ride with me for one more beat, because the Budden angle has an entire second floor that most of the timeline scrolled right past without unpacking. Joe did not just push back on the warning. He rewired the entire power dynamic wrapped around it in the same breath. The core of what he laid on the table was this: there was a moment in time, years back, when a warning like the one Drake issued on that stream would have absolutely inserted real fear into a room full of rappers. That is a historical fact, not something up for debate. There was a stretch where a single Drake subliminal could reroute a career, where a lukewarm Drake shoutout could freeze a whole rollout, where MCs really did tiptoe around him in interviews and podcast segments and social media posts. Joe's argument was never that Drake was never dangerous. Joe's argument was that the era of that danger has officially closed, and the reason it closed is not emotional at all. It is entirely evidentiary. 2 public losses on the record, 1 legal document filed with a judge, 0 examples made of anybody anywhere on the field since the war ended. Fear in hip-hop is not a reputation you inherit and hold on to forever like a family heirloom. It is a debt you have to keep paying in blood, on wax, in front of witnesses, and that particular account has been running on fumes for a long time now. And here is the frostbite that made this segment go so viral. Joe delivered that whole verdict while still openly admitting the pen has ink. He handed Drake the talent trophy and stripped him of the fear trophy in the exact same exhale. That is the most surgical version of this critique that could possibly exist, because it cannot be dismissed as bitterness or hating. It is a fan of the music reading the culture its own reflection in the coldest possible mirror. And what made the whole podcast segment even more brutal was the setting wrapped around it, because this was not a sober strategic response to competition unfolding in a boardroom or a studio session. This stream moment Drake chose for his big tough guy declaration was surrounded by chain talk, Cartier receipts, double-plated iced-out numbers, price tags he did not even want to say out loud on camera. There was audible purring happening on the stream. Actual audible purring over jewelry in the middle of a rap warning. The Budden panel pointed out exactly what a whole lot of us were already thinking in real time. He just dropped 3 projects with barely a memorable line to pull between all of them, and the very first thing he wanted to flex in front of the culture was the pen. That is inverted. That is backwards. That is a man reaching for a weapon that the entire culture already watched jam on him in front of millions of viewers barely 18 months ago. And then came what might be the single most exposing moment of the entire episode. One of the voices who has spent years calling Drake his brother, years openly writing for the music, the movement, the whole apparatus, flipped on camera in real time. That is not my guy. I do not want to meet him. Why would I want to meet another dude in the first place? Which, side note, is an absolutely wild deflection given that the same person sits in a room full of dudes twice a week for a living, but the deflection is not the story here. The retreat is the story. When someone who has staked their entire public credibility on standing shoulder to shoulder with you starts moonwalking away the second your tough talk turns lame, that tells you exactly how the warning landed with the very people who were supposed to amplify it up the food chain and into the culture at large. Look at the sequence one more time, because the choreography of this collapse is devastating when you slow it down. First, Drake spends the better part of a decade as the single most defended man in the entire podcast circuit. Second, he loses the biggest rap battle in the recorded history of the genre by a margin nobody has ever seen before. Third, and this piece is critical to the whole picture, the defenses kept flowing anyway, through the loss itself, through the memes, through the funeral the internet threw for his credibility in the summer of 2024. That same room of voices kept calling him their guy, kept writing for the music, kept the drawbridge lowered even when the water was on fire. It took chain talk and a purring session on a gambling stream to create the first real public fracture. Not the loss to Kendrick. Not the lawsuit against his own label. The outfit flex. That is how thin the goodwill has been sliced by now. The straw that finally broke the camel's back was not a rap crime at all. It was an aesthetic misfire on a Tuesday night in front of a Kickstream chat, which is honestly a poetic ending nobody could have scripted in advance if they tried for a full calendar year in a writer's room. When your own amplifier unplugs the microphone over vibes, the foundation propping up the tough talk is not stable, and it raises a question nobody on that panel actually wanted to sit in front of. If the exact same warning had come from the 2018 model of Drake, would a single laugh have escaped anybody's mouth in that room? Of course not. Nobody would have blinked. The laughter is not about the line at all. The laughter is about the balance sheet the line is written on. Now let me be crystal clear about something before the comment section combusts into flames, because I am not out here twisting facts for engagement or clout or anything else. Nobody with functioning eardrums is arguing Drake cannot rap. Nobody said the music he cooked up during the wars was garbage. Go back and revisit those records with a clean ear. They had fire in them. They had craftsmanship. They had wordplay that would have ended smaller artists on impact. The pen was never the punchline. The problem was never talent. The problem is that the last time the pen came out of its sheath in a real war, someone across from him was just plainly better on every measurable axis. That is it. That is the entire verdict. He took a loss to Pusha T back in 2018, took his time, reloaded quietly, came back with new music, and then walked directly into Kendrick Lamar and absorbed the most public, most cultural, most airtight loss the genre has ever produced in its 50-year lifespan. 2 losses in 2 eras, both of them ended by knockout, both of them witnessed by the entire world. And here is the piece that matters for everything unfolding right now on that stream. There has never been a hip-hop precedent for talking the loudest immediately after the whole planet watched you lose without first making an example of at least one person on the field. You do not get to skip that step. The playground watched the fight go down. You can be the toughest kid who ever lost, and it still does not move a single needle, because until somebody fresh gets dropped on wax, the hallway is not going to flinch when you walk down it. That is not hate. That is just how the food chain has functioned since day one of this genre, going back before any of us were paying attention. And here is the corner of the debate that really exposes where the goalposts have quietly shifted under everybody's feet. When the Budden panel was asked flat out on air, can Drake still threaten whoever he wants? The room split in half, and the split itself is the actual story. One side argued that yes, technically anybody with a pen and a microphone can threaten anybody they want to, and Drake absolutely has the arsenal to do it against a wide roster of names. The other side sliced right through with the only question that actually matters at the end of the day. A threat and a fear are not the same object. Anybody can issue a threat. A toddler can issue a threat. The real currency of a threat is measured entirely by whether the recipient's behavior actually shifts in response. And right now there is not a single MC of any real consequence whose behavior would move a single millimeter because Drake warned them about a reply on a kickstream between poker hands. Kendrick? Come on now. That chapter closed in front of the entire species, and nobody in the history of this culture comes back from that kind of loss on the 3rd day. Cole? Retired from the field by his own signature on his own apology at his own show. Rocky? Already throwing punches, already connecting, already unbothered by anything Drake could conceivably say. So Drake is left broadcasting a warning into a room where every single body in it has either already beaten him, walked away from the sport entirely, or is actively swinging at him with both hands. That is not a warning. That is a voicemail nobody in the building is planning to check anytime soon. But we still have not touched the piece that makes this entire episode so much heavier for Drake specifically, and this is the piece too many voices in this space keep tiptoeing around like it is not sitting in the middle of the room. So let me plant both boots and say it clean, without hedging. The last battle Drake lost did not end in the vocal booth at all. It ended in a courtroom. The final piece of writing Drake released that the entire culture actually sat down and read from top to bottom was not a verse on a diss track, it was a legal filing with a case number attached to it. And I have combed through that paperwork more times than I care to publicly admit at this point, so we are not going to be dishonest about what is inside of it. This is not speculation from a random channel on the internet. In black ink on white paper, the argument was made that the label was artificially inflating the streaming numbers of the very song that ended him in the war. And on top of that, and this is the piece that still freezes my breath every single time I read it, the paperwork characterized a rap record as a physical threat to his body. A diss track framed as an invitation for vigilante violence, submitted to a judge for legal review. Do you understand what that document does to a warning like, watch how you respond, because the ink still moves? It hollows the whole thing out completely from the inside. You cannot threaten the booth after you subpoenaed the booth. You cannot instruct MCs to watch their mouths in a genre where your most recent creative act was putting another artist's lyrics in front of attorneys and asking a judge for protection. If we are going to keep debating who is warning who is stepping in the booth, who is aiming at who, fine, that debate can continue. But that block of context is welded to the conversation permanently now. It cannot be unscrewed. It cannot be edited out. It cannot be forgotten by anybody who was actually paying attention when it happened. Any breakdown of Drake's pen in 2026 that leaves out the legal document is not a breakdown at all. It is fan fiction with a nice thumbnail. And this is precisely why so many voices, Budden included, keep circling the same conclusion from separate angles without coordinating with each other. Drake is not feared as a competitor anymore. He is handled with caution as a litigant. Those are two entirely different reputations to carry into a rap beef, and they generate two entirely different responses from the opposition. One makes rappers sharpen their pens and stay up all night writing. The other makes them shrug their shoulders, log off, and get back to work on their own projects like nothing was said at all. And since everybody wants to hand out second chances and clean slates all of a sudden, let us be intellectually consistent across the entire board here. Because this is the section where a whole lot of people are about to squirm in their seats. The defense currently being mounted for Drake goes something like this. Sure, he lost the battle. Sure, he sued the label. But the pen is still nasty on wax. And if he goes out into the field and finally makes an example of somebody on record, the fear reboots overnight and everything returns to normal. Okay, cool. Let us accept that entire framework in full for the sake of the argument. Now apply it evenly across the sport. Does J. Cole get that exact same grace? Sit with that question for a second. Cole stepped into a battle, felt the temperature of the water, apologized on stage in front of his own crowd at his own festival, and walked out of the ring on his own 2 feet. And for that single move, giant chunks of the internet permanently revoked his competitive credentials on the spot. Every single time Cole says anything with even a trace of pepper on record now, there is a whole segment of the culture covering its ears and yelling that he forfeited the right to spice a bar 2 years ago. But here is the distinction: nobody actually wants to speak out loud in a room full of Drake fans. J. Cole apologized for a verse. He did not sue anybody over one. He did not put another rapper's lyrics into a lawsuit and hand them to a judge. If the man with the courtroom filing gets an unlocked path back into being feared by the culture, then the man who just said "my bad" on wax at his own festival deserves that identical road back into competition at minimum. I am not out here saying Cole will ever suit up for battle again. I do not believe he wants to, and that is entirely his call to make from his own couch. But the double standard reeks from a mile away. And if we are wheeling the goalposts across the field for Drake, we better be dragging those same goalposts back across the field for J. Cole in the exact same motion. Otherwise, we should just admit out loud that the standards were never really about rap in the first place, and they were always about which artist your feed happens to like more on any given Tuesday. And I genuinely want your honest read on this one. Does Cole get the identical grace or not? Sound off in the comments below, but bring logic with you into that box, not just fanhood. So now let us actually map the battlefield properly, because once you accept that the warning exists on the record, the very next question that has to be asked out loud is the one the podcast panel circled all night long without ever getting a straight answer to. Who is that warning even capable of reaching in 2026? Run the roster. Is Drake warning Ghana? Young Thug? Lil Yachty? Don Toliver? Central C? In the loosest, most abstract, technically a rapper definition of the word, sure, maybe, a warning can theoretically be aimed at whoever it applies to on a given night. But none of those names actually occupy the MC seat in the traditional bar for bar, come see about me sense that a warning requires to have any actual weight behind it. And warning any of them costs Drake nothing at all. The entire currency of a warning is measured in the fear it puts inside people who could genuinely respond in kind. And that is exactly where the whole architecture crumbles into dust, because the names that could genuinely respond are the exact same names who are the least concerned about anything Drake has to say on a stream. So, what is left in your hand at the end of all this math? A warning that only lands on people it was never designed to threaten in the first place, ricocheting harmlessly off the very MCs it was engineered to shake to the core. That is not a warning. That is a weather report. It is ambient noise floating in the room that nobody has to reroute their week around. And the single most telling piece of the entire Budden segment, the piece nearly the whole timeline missed the first time around, is that throughout every debate about who Drake could possibly be talking to on that stream, A$AP Rocky's name barely surfaced in the fear conversation at all, despite Rocky being literally the only rapper on this planet actively trading punches with Drake in the current moment. The man in the actual ring was not even part of the fear discussion. That single detail tells you absolutely everything you need to know about how much fear the warning is actually generating out there in the field. Here is my honest reading of what that stream moment really was, and I do not think it is complicated the second you scrub the shine off of it and look at the raw architecture underneath. That warning was not aimed at rappers at all. That warning was aimed squarely at the fans. Look at who that performance actually serves at the end of the night. There is an enormous audience out there that still genuinely believes Drake did not drop a single thing in the war, that he is still the peak of the mountain, the best rapper alive, the best dressed man in the game, the best at every single metric that can be measured. And that audience has been hungry for months for a moment where Drake sounds like the untouchable version of himself again, the version they remember from the OVO sound radio era. That stream delivered exactly that fantasy on a silver platter. The chains, the swagger, the pen talk, that was a promo reel produced for the home crowd, not a message directed at the opposition. That is performative toughness manufactured for the people already inside the stadium, because the people outside the stadium stopped buying tickets around the time the second battle wrapped up on a Saturday night. And I want to be fair on this one more time, because the pen itself was never the actual issue in this whole saga. Nobody serious ever said his war records were weak on impact. They said Kendrick's were sharper on the same battlefield, and that assessment held up under every possible replay. And being the second best rapper in the biggest rap war ever waged in the history of the genre is not a talent problem, it is a standing problem, and those two problems require completely different solutions. But standing is exactly what a warning is designed to project outward into a room, and you cannot project standing that you do not currently possess in your own bank account. Right now, Drake is in a position where he is genuinely lucky A$AP Rocky is even entertaining him in the exchange at all. Because the honest read from the outside is that engaging with Drake competitively in 2026 is starting to look less like a challenge and a lot more like community service. When responding to you begins to look like bullying instead of competition, the warning era has fully closed for business, and no amount of stream charisma unlocks the doors again until somebody, somewhere, actually gets made an example of on wax. That is the whole game in one sentence. Now if you are wondering what the recovery blueprint even looks like from here, because theoretically there is one still on the table, it is worth putting the actual steps on the table even if the odds are long from this altitude. The culture has a very specific, very ancient formula for restoring fear to a name that has lost it, and not a single step in that formula involves streams, chart positions, jewelry receipts, or podcast appearances. Step 1. Somebody tests you publicly on record, by name, with clear intent. Step 2. You respond on wax, quickly, cleanly, no filters, no attorneys anywhere near the process, no subliminals disguised in plausible deniability. Step 3. That response has to be so decisive on impact that the entire conversation ends exactly where you are standing when you finish the verse. That is the recipe. That is the whole recipe from top to bottom, and it has been in effect since the earliest days of the genre going back to the days of Cool Mode D and Busy Bee. The problem for Drake in particular is that every single element of his recent behavior runs perpendicular to that formula in every possible direction. The responses have been slow, sideways, and lawyered from the beginning. The warnings have been aimed at nobody in particular, generic and vague. The energy has been spent on the audience instead of the actual opposition standing across from him. Until one of those levers gets flipped in a visible, undeniable way, the fear market stays boarded up with plywood over the windows. And the wildest layer of all this whole story? Everybody around him already knows it in their bones. The panel knew it. The timeline knew it. Somewhere deep down, I have a strong feeling Drake knows it too, which is exactly why the warning was vague enough to mean everything and nobody at the same time on that specific night. So where does that leave the whole picture at the end of the day? Exactly where the podcast panel left it, and honestly, exactly where the culture left it several months back when the dust from the war first settled. The ink is not dry. Nobody serious ever claimed it was dry. But the fear is gone completely. The field is unbothered by anything he says. The only live opponent standing across from him with fists up is A$AP Rocky, and the last document the culture actually read from Drake had a case number stamped on the top corner instead of a verse count. A warning without fear stitched into the seams of it is just content in the modern sense of the word. And that is the piece that should worry Drake's corner the most going forward, because Drake has never had a problem being content in the marketplace. The problem is that he used to be content that rappers were genuinely afraid of when it dropped. Now he is content that podcasters audit in real time on a Wednesday afternoon, with his own former defenders leading the audit and cracking jokes at his expense between the ad reads. And look, I do not have some 4D Chess Galaxy brain hot take to close this one out with in the final paragraph. Sometimes the story really is exactly what it looks like on the surface when you strip away the noise. A legend flexed too hard on a stream. The toughest room in podcasting told him to cut it out on his own network of friends. And the only man he is actually beefing with right now kept doing sit-ups in the corner without saying a single word on the way out. That is the entire canvas, painted in the simplest colors possible. But I am genuinely curious where all of you land on this one after everything we just unpacked together. Does the Drake pen still put fear in anybody at all in 2026, or has the warning economy officially declared bankruptcy in front of the whole world? Drop your verdict in the comments below and make your case, because I am reading every single one of them tonight. Smash that like button if this breakdown put some pieces together for you, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe and hit the bell so you are on the ground floor the next time this culture cracks itself open in real time in front of a live audience. Because from where I am sitting tonight, this story is not finished yet. It is only pausing to breathe before the next chapter starts writing itself. Catch me on the next one, family. Peace, and stay dangerous out there in these streets. And one last thought before you scroll away from this video, keep your eyes locked on Rocky's next studio session, because if any single response is going to reshape this entire conversation before the year closes out, it is going to come from that camp first. Not from a stream, not from a lawsuit, but from the booth where all of this was supposed to be settled in the first place.